I'm sure you and I both know this, but relationships are the most important area of life. I mean, there's so much research, studies, books, videos out there that just illustrate how impactful relationships and, more importantly, meaningful relationships are on someone's long term success, happiness, and well being. Yet, despite the fact that, we nod our heads yes and say we care about our relationships, we value our relationships, how often do your actions reflect that? And we haven't, dived too much into this, and I might have briefly mentioned this in the past, but for me, one thing that I think about quite a bit when I talk to people, especially my age, who are sort of, grinding, right? They're grinding on their careers, they're really trying to level up and so forth, which kudos to you. Give credit where credit's due. But at what cost, right? Because you say you value relationships, yet you're not making the time, nor do you have the energy to be fully present with those when you are making the time. And that's okay, but only if your relationships aren't your first priority. If you say that they are, then your actions don't reflect that. Because ultimately, words without action are meaningless. It's only when you put action behind something you care about that it's demonstrated as a value. And your values shape your character. Your character shapes your presence, the same presence that you embody when you're in the company of others, especially those you care about. So when it comes to, how do I demonstrate that I value my relationships? I mean, one example that we won't dive too much into for the sake of this video is making the shifts in your life entirely, right? If you're working a job that is over demanding on your time and energy, that is leaving less of both for your relationships, then there's a clear misalignment there. And when you're not living in accordance with your values, you're not being yourself. But on a more consistent day to day basis, right, you can still not demonstrate or embody your values as much as you claim to. Because relationships, at the end of the day, they're not something you can just kind of pick up here and there, you know, like a toy you get to play with when you feel like it. At least not in my book. And everyone has their own definition of relationships and what sort of dynamic that they hope to cultivate in them. But at least from my perspective, a meaningful relationship, one that is nourishing, fulfilling to me, is ultimately built upon consistency, on consistently showing up for this person who I care about. Because it's the same with me and my own relationship with myself. I show up for myself day in and day out. And while it might not necessarily need to be the same for your friendships and whatnot, it's the showing up and the consistency, the action that shows you care, that shows you value relationships, that show you value this person in your life. And one tool that I've been using since even when I was working in banking and had less time and energy, which I'll throw on screen And I'll throw a link in the description if you use Notion and are curious, but it's basically a relationship tracker, which for those of you who maybe have done like professional networking and whatnot, you've used something similar, but it's basically just a kind of list of names of people that I care about and want to make sure I'm consistently, keeping up with and checking in on. And, it reminds me of how long it's been, if, it's nearing a time to reach out or spend time, so on and so forth. This way, it doesn't fly under the radar, right? It doesn't get brushed under the rug because it's so easy to say life got in the way or life happens when we haven't seen a friend for months on end and we claim that we don't have time, that we don't have, energy, that we're busy. I'm sorry, but that's bullshit. Because at the end of the day, if you truly care about something or someone, you make the time, right? And it doesn't necessarily always have to be, you know, spending 4 or 5 hours, getting dinner, like hanging out. It can be something as simple as a FaceTime call, getting a quick coffee, going for a walk, something that shows that you care and that you value and that you're thinking of this person, that this person means something to you. Because with relationships, I guess this is the one thing that I've learned from my background in finance is that you invest in them early and often. And the more you do that, the more they compound over time. And it's this compounding that builds this level of meaning, fulfillment, and depth in your relationships that ultimately reflects in your life in terms of your well being, your happiness, and success. And it breaks my heart because, again, being in my early 20s, living in New York City, I'm surrounded by so many people, both my age and older, who, are hustling. They're really trying to level up and make strides in their careers, but at what cost, right? At what cost? They don't have the time per se, or more so, they don't have the energy to be able to show up for the people they care about. And you might not realize it when you're younger, but when you don't show up for somebody, it's more difficult for them to want to show up for you, right? So you just kind of pop out of nowhere when you need support, and the rest of the time, you're a ghost. Relationships don't work like that. They're not built on these big swings and huge moments, but all the little moments, time, consistency in between. And it's that continual investment, that continual action that shows you care, that you value relationships, you value this person, that's reflected when you face challenging situations in your life, you face uncertainty, and you need support. Those friends are there because they'll show up for you just as much as you've shown up for them. And that doesn't happen unless you take action. And maybe it sounds cheesy to have something like a little tracker to keep track of your friends. You're like, what the hell? Like, why would I need that? But at the end of the day, any sort of action, any sort of tool that you implement, it shows you care. And I care a lot about my relationships. I really do. And there has been no greater factor, input, whatever you want to call it, on my overall contentness, my happiness, than having these sort of relationships, investing in them. So I encourage you to think about yourself and your own life and actions. Think about your relationships? Where do they fall in your priority in your life? And do your actions reflect that? Think about the people in your life who you say you value, and do you show up for them? Just some things to consider. So, with that, I appreciate your time, and I'll see you tomorrow.